Good evening. I'm Dan Brown. I'm the Director of the School of Environmental and Forest Sciences. I am excited to introduce the speaker for our 2025 edition of our Sustaining Our World lecture series. As the keynote event in CEFS each year, we are grateful to acknowledge the generous support of donors who have supported us in this series, and this year's support is coming from an endowment established by the estate of Morton J. Lauritsen, who was a graduate of our program in the 1930s. I'm excited to introduce Hilary Franz as this year's speaker. She served as Washington State's Commissioner of Public Lands from 2017 to 2025. I had the pleasure to serve on the Board of Natural Resources with her during most of that time, and I'm thrilled to have her back at the UW for this event. As CPL, as the role is affectionately abbreviated, Hilary led the state's wildfire response and stewarded 6 million acres of public lands, including aquatic, forest, agricultural, commercial, clean energy, and residential lands. She has been recognized nationally and internationally for her work in climate change, wildfire response, forest conservation and restoration, clean energy, and salmon recovery. In her 30-year career, Hilary has focused on cleaning up waterways, restoring critical fish and wildlife habitat, and conserving forests and farmlands. She put in place the largest aquatic conservation easement in the world and the state's first kelp and eelgrass preserves. And under her leadership, Washington became the first place in the world to remove and ban aquatic fish farming from its waters. I got to vote on that.
Yes, you did. Thank you. I needed your vote.
Hilary launched the Keep Washington Evergreen Initiative to restore 1 million acres, conserve 1 million acres, and reforest 1 million acres of forests. After almost 2 million acres burned between 2014 and 2015, she led the transformation of Washington State's wildfire response by developing the state's first Forest Health Resilience Plan and then leading the restoration of almost 1 million acres in just 7 years. What I saw working alongside Hilary was a fierce advocate for nature, for communities, and for economic development, all pillars of sustainability. I was especially impressed by her boundless energy and optimism, which has no doubt fueled her success and is needed now more than ever. Please join me in welcoming Hilary Franz.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dan, for your kind words and also for your service on the board. It is not an easy job, but it's a really important job, and to have thoughtful leaders who bring science from the social and the economic and the environment to decision making is key. I want to thank you all for being here and also for inviting me. It's actually really special to be actually in this room because I spent my junior year at the University of Washington. I did not take a science class here, don't fault me, sorry. I took political science and psychology, which, trust me, I needed it in this role. I also was in this room that I did a debate for the Commissioner of Public Lands and was endorsed by the 36 LD right in this room. So which was very monumental for me to be able to then win in this role. So now I know my talk is titled Climate Change and Resilience, How Science and Solutions Can Bring Society Together. And much of you may be thinking that I'm going to talk about environmental science, but I'm going to be really frank with you that as a lawyer and a politician, whose last science class was over 2 decades ago, it's not a good idea for me to lecture on the environment to students, to professors, and to the experts. And so instead, a lot of my talk is actually going to be about what I've learned over the last 8 years working on the intersection of climate change, the environment, and politics at a time where our state and our country is growing even more divided and when we need to be working more together. So think social science with a tinge of political science. I will be sharing things that I've grown to understand, my opinions, my ideas, and what I've learned in my experience, and what I see is needed. And so So for the last 8 years, I have had the great honor to be serving as a Commissioner of Public Lands. It is one of the least known positions of statewide office, but very, very important. Overseeing 2 million acres of forest land, half of that is set aside in pure conservation. Over 1 million acres of agricultural land, largest wheat producer in the state, one of the largest orchard and vineyards. Tariffs do hit us, and they hit us hard. Overseeing our aquatic lands, everything from the coast to the Puget Sounds, rivers, lakes, and streams. And we also oversee geology. So think we're a volatile state, not just politically, but also geologically. So earthquakes, tsunamis, landslides, and 5 live volcanoes. The one prayer I made every night: don't burn the state down, and please don't erupt on my watch. That latter did not happen, which I'm thrilled about. And lastly, oversee wildfire for the state of Washington, which has become a full-time job. So just a quick little bit about me. I grew up with a real deep connection to the environment, public service, and actually seeing the difference between liberals and conservatives. I was raised by a single father and my grandparents. My father worked for the city of Portland, a public servant who believed that government service was absolutely critical to providing a good education, healthy environment, efficient transportation, public safety, caring for the most vulnerable. And because he was a single parent, instead of kickball and Atari, yes, I know most of you don't know what that is, but I didn't spend my time doing that. I spent it in City Hall watching policies being made. And if you can just think, my childhood was basically watching Portlandia. Probably best way to describe it. Now, my grandparents were ranchers from the Midwest. My grandfather came from complete poverty, and the farm went under in the Great Depression, the black blizzards of South Dakota. And they were lucky. In 1938, they moved west and they landed in Tacoma, where the farms were lush, the forests were healthy. They got jobs, and every dollar they put to farmland, and they became ranchers. They believed in the value of hard work. They believed in self-sufficiency, and if you take care of the land, it will take care of you. And every Sunday night, we had dinner together. And my grandfather and my father sat opposite ends of the table, and all they did was argue. They argued over issues with my father's liberal perspective and my grandfather's conservative perspective. And in the end, I'll be honest, my father in Portlandia had a tighter grip on my heart and also on my head. I selected my college because it was one of the most liberal colleges, Smith College on the East Coast. My original focus was in psychology, hoping that I could heal societal illnesses, everything from pathologies and suicide to violence and addiction. I spent my summer, my first year, I went to Alaska, and that's when things changed. I went there because of the highest suicide rate in the nation was in Alaska, where you had impoverished people whose economics and livelihood depended on natural resources, who struggled. And the Valdez oil spill happened, and it had just occurred. It's one of the largest oil spills in history, devastating the ecosystem, critical fish and wildlife, and local communities where their cultural, social, and economical livelihoods depended on this. This experience solidified my commitment to working in the environment. And I went on to law school. I selected my law school because it was the most liberal, so think UC Berkeley on liberal steroids. I also, then when I went after law school, I came back to the Northwest and I began practicing environmental law. And in my work, I represented community nonprofit organizations, I represented tribes, I represented farmers, and we took on local, state, federal government, and corporations. My first case out of law school went to the Washington State Supreme Court, and my client ran out of money, and I was paid in sheep. Little known fact, went to U.S. Supreme Court, is still a precedential law case. I recommend that the ROI on sheep is not great. And even as you watch the volatility of the stock market, it still I recommend switching to sheep in payment. But after a while, I grew really, really frustrated with litigation and law. And it's largely because every time I'd win a case, either the local or state or federal government then changed the law, or somebody argued a different fact pattern. And I realized that it was moving too slow, and I wasn't making the kind of fast change that I wanted. And so I ran for local government first, and then in 2016, I ran for Commissioner of Public Lands. I really wanted to see a change. And I'll be honest, the Commissioner of Public Lands rule helped me see the world differently and how we can create change. So if you think of 2016, you could probably all remember what happened in 2016. It was an incredibly divisive period, and I don't think anybody thought it would get more divisive, and yet here we are. Probably one of the most divisive times, at least in my lifetime. It was also a critical time for Washington State, as the impacts of climate change were truly taking hold. 2014, we had 1,480 wildfires, 386,972 acres burned. In one fire alone, it was over 250,000 acres burned, which is about 4 times the size of Seattle. In 2015, it would be even worse, with over 1,500 fires, 1 million acres burning, over 1,600 square miles, and we tragically lost 3 firefighters that year, and almost lost a number of communities. And in 2016, when I was elected to lead the wildfire for the state of Washington, I'll be honest, I was elected largely by King County residents who weren't thinking about wildfire. They weren't thinking about the impacts that it had to the communities and the threats. And to be honest, I had no experience in wildfire, no experience in fire management, no experience in emergency response. And I couldn't even put out a kitchen fire. And that's true, I couldn't. I still can't to this day. And in eastern Washington, rural Washington, firefighters had reasons to be concerned. And I went down 2 weeks after being elected to meet with Representative Joel Kretz. He is from the 7th District of Washington State, Okanagan, real Republican, real conservative. And before I met with him, just 2 weeks after being elected, before I was sworn into office, my staffer went in to say I was here, and he said, "I will let her talk, and then I will kill her." It's I don't recommend this job. You might not come out alive. Actually, that's a joke. I will be honest, that was very intimidating, but I also realized I needed to know why he was so threatened and so angry. And so I went in and I spoke. I spoke really quickly, and the first thing I did was start actually with a sense of humility. I said, "Look, I know you didn't elect me. I know your community didn't elect me. I know your people didn't elect me. I know you're scared about whether I'm really going to be able to do a good job of protecting the state, protecting the forest, protecting communities, and I have no idea how to fight fires, and I have no idea what your community experienced, but I want to learn, and I don't want to fail you. I don't want to fail your community. I don't want to fail your state." And so he invited me to come visit and see with my very own eyes what his backyard looked like, every which way. And he showed me what the Carlton complex and a number of fires did on the landscape, the threat it posed. He then also showed me how literally with forest health, by restoring the health of the forest, removing the dead, dying, diseased trees, removing the fuel load on the forest floor, so it looks like this. The forest can actually fight those fires on their own. But we had neglected the forest. We had also neglected our wildfire. We had 0 in our budget for wildfire response and 0 in our budget for forest restoration, even though we had already lost 2 million acres of fires and lost lives. We had only 40 full-time firefighters for the state of Washington. We had 8 Vietnam War era Hueys that actually fought those fires. And this is to fight between 1,200 and 1,900 fires a year, which is now every single year. And we had no plan or resources or capacity to restore the health of forest on state lands, federal lands, tribal, or even private lands. At the end of the tour, he asked if I'd have dinner with him. It was a 6-hour drive, 4 days before Christmas. I had not done any Christmas shopping for my boys. I was tempted to say, I think I'll get back on the road, but I didn't. And I had dinner with him. And this man who, from Wakanda, Washington, tough as nails, rugged, aggressive, gun-toting, rural rancher, broke down in tears. And he said, "You're the first one in Washington State office that has come here to my community to see with your own eyes and listen and understand what's not working." And I said, "This isn't my last visit. I will be back, and I will not stop working on this issue till we change the course we're on." That partnership we forged that day, a leader from rural conservative Washington and a leader from an urban liberal Washington, truly changed the trajectory of our state. Now, I have an unbelievable team of 2,400 people, some are in this office here today, who put their lives on the line, who worked hard for the agency. Through us working together and through the learning from him and other leaders, we changed the trajectory so that now, in 7 years, we've restored 1 million acres of forest from not having any resources to do it. The last 4 years, we've kept 95% of our fires below 10 acres. The number of acres burned now is back to the early 2000s, which is a trajectory no state right now can even talk about and say is possible. We passed a $500 million investment unanimously, which is never ever heard in the halls of Olympia. It is never heard in the halls of Congress. And it's because of the relationships we built and trust. So from that moment on, I committed to spending more time out on the landscape, where the wildfires are burning, the forests are dying, where the communities are flooding, where farms are struggling with drought and dust storms. I spent time with folks who don't look like me, they don't dress like me, they don't talk like me, except for swear as much as me. They don't vote like me. I spent time in the most conservative communities breaking bread and drinking a lot of whiskey, actually, at the coffee shops, the diners, the rodeos, the Elks Club, walking the land and working the land with them. This is me actually on a cattle drive. I have an 85-year-old grandma down to a 4-year-old granddaughter. They go every single year, 6 generations, moving the cattle back and forth before we were even a state. I listened to their anger, their frustration, their challenges, their fears. And one of the people I met with was a man in his 40s who grew up in Port Angeles, Washington, a city that was vibrant and strong if you go back 50 plus years ago, until the spotted owl decision hit, which is one of the decisions I actually worked on and supported. But I didn't understand the consequences, and I didn't even actually care when I was working on it. And he told me how when that decision came down overnight, how when he went to school the next day as a 5th, 6th grader, he knew exactly whose families had jobs and whose didn't. And he watched over a year how his classmates began to struggle in school, to come to school. He saw increasing addiction. He saw people being kicked out of the home. He saw domestic violence. And when you look across our rural communities in the state, you look at across our country, the data reflects that these decisions of the past still play out today, where we have now generational poverty that has settled in. I also saw their hearts. I saw how much these people care about the land. They work hard on the land every single day, and they're committed to caring for it and tending it. I walked in their shoes. The 3 takeaways that I had was I realized they don't trust environmental policies, practices, and regulations because they have not been included in developing them. And often those policies and practices over the past decades have harmed them because it didn't include them in considering and thinking about it. I also realized that they are like my grandfather. They care about the environment. They care about the land, and they know that climate change is here. They feel it. They can smell it in the air. They can touch it in the soils. And I also realized over these 8 years that the way I saw our world as liberals and conservatives, Democrats and Republicans, was a veil that actually blinded me. It blinded me to people's values. It blinded me to people's experiences, their understandings, their perspectives. It also blinded me to really effective solutions that are going to work for everyone in our community. So I finally had some time since being commissioner to read a book. And you'd think that I would read some, fiction that doesn't have anything to do with politics. But instead, I picked up this book many years ago, actually, in my role, trying to see if I could understand how to bridge this division I see at every single level of government I've worked in. And it's The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. If you haven't read it, I urge you to do it. It explains that much of what I've seen and the breakdown in our political discourse that we're seeing now, but we've been building up to it, isn't just a recent trend. It's a trend that goes back through our evolution as part of our moral psychology. And he points out 3 basic principles of moral psychology that actually really reflect my last 8 years. First is intuitions come first. Strategic reasoning comes second. This is why you can't persuade. I mean, come on, Thanksgiving, Christmas, come on, right? You can't persuade someone with reasons if their passions are so engaged. You can't argue someone out of their moral and political positions. Providing just science and data as much as you can is not going to change their feelings. If you put up the graphs and the data as you're like, here's wildfire, here's climate, or here's the polar bears, it is not going to change their perspective. I think Jonathan, I love this quote, you can't make a dog happy by forcibly wagging its tail, and you can't change people's minds by utterly refuting their arguments, right? Which reminded me of my grandfather and my father at the table for, 18 years. It's more honestly about what they think about a person. And you can all apply this yourself. Do they trust the person that's pushing that idea out? Did that person take into consideration the issues that they deal with or their groups that they identify deal with? Was that person there for them when they needed them most? Second, and this is really intriguing, and I need to go back to university to learn more and understand more, but Haight's research also shows there's a fundamental difference between liberals and conservatives in their moral principles, okay? Haight suggests that human beings are born with these moral receptors, kind of like taste buds, right? That organically incline them to like or dislike certain things. And our minds come equipped to feel that pleasure or displeasure in the social world. And he identifies 6 primary moral foundations that are held across individuals and cultures. It doesn't matter here whether it's here in the US or across the globe, okay? And these are the 6: care versus harm, fairness versus cheating, liberty versus oppression, loyalty versus betrayal, authority versus subversion, purity versus degradation. And everyone has these. Everyone has them. I know there might be some few people we think right now that don't, and I agree with that, probably true, but everyone by and large has all of these. But what is research studying hundreds of thousands, probably 1 million at this point, of folks show, and it's shown in this graph, is that how folks score on the 6 moral foundations. So he found repeatedly that liberals value care and fairness as primary, along with liberty. That is their highest priority of concern. And he found that conservatives, actually, they value for sure care and liberty and fairness, but they value it equally along with loyalty, authority, and sanctity. All 6 are important to all liberals and all conservatives. It's just the valuation they put on them. So I'll give you another example, sort of just to help perspective. You can see this liberal moral matrix. They're putting more value on the first 3, with the latter 3 being important, but not as important. And then here's the social conservative moral matrix. More sacred value, preserve the institutions and traditions that sustain all 6 of these. So when I saw this, I wish that somebody had told me this back when I was 4 years old, because there would not have been as much drama and trauma in my household, because I'm sure my father and my grandfather would have listened to my position on Haight's theory. But last point, and this is another one that is really valuable. And I will tell you, in my 8 years out in the field, whether it's in the most urban environment, the most rural environment, whether it is in the halls of Olympia or in the halls of DC, this is absolutely occurring and paralyzing us, that morality binds and blinds us. On our planet, we have large-scale cooperation is rare, but it happens, right, when we come together. And we usually are coming together around to worship something. So you can think about it in the context of religion, right? People come together to worship something they see as sacred. We're at the University of Washington. Fraternities come together to worship something sacred. Burning Man, others that are leaders, whether it's a Martin Luther King or whether it is our current Trump. Once you see folks circling around that sacred value, What you also see is them going blind to anything that contradicts those values. When this happens, it creates a polarity that says, I am good, they are bad. And if you know what a group holds sacred, you will actually be able to actually know where they're blind to the reason or discussion. I'm going to give you some examples. These are not my personal beliefs, but they're going to give you examples. Nuclear energy. Everything shows that nuclear energy is going to help reduce carbon emissions, yet it's bad in some eyes. You could look at solar power. Solar power is going to reduce carbon emissions with cleaner energy, yet when you look at where the materials come from and how they're mined, there's big questions about the impacts on the environment and also sometimes human rights. A large question that's happening in our state and actually globally is the context around building with locally sourced wood. And the question around whether it is good or whether it's bad, where it might reduce the emissions from concrete and steel and also reducing transportation impacts. So as you can see, hate basically points us out where morality binds and blinds. This is not just something that happens to people on either side. And you see this quote here, I think his last point, it blinds us to the fact that each team is composed of good people who have something important to say. So what can we do to change our course and save our planet and our people? So before I get to this question, because it's a different time and age, I know that. Given all the anger and frustration and hostility we're witnessing in our neighborhoods, our communities, nationally, towards the other political party, some of you may be thinking, why should we even try? It's impossible. Why try to bring people together? We're so different. It's so ugly. We're so divided. And I'm going to push back on that because I truly believe that there are more people that are like my father and like my grandfather in this world, in this state and in this country. And like my father and grandfather, both liberals and conservatives have value. They each see different threats. They are experts in different values. They have different strengths. And if you let one side run everything, they're going to address the concerns that they care about, and they're going to probably ignore some perspectives and experiences. And I believe you need both, pushing against each other to get to good policy decisions. Second, I believe that it is more critical than ever before that we move to a path of cooperation, trading in anger for understanding, and climate is the greatest environmental crisis of our time. And I've stood on the front lines of wildfires as they burned over 600,000 acres in just 72 hours, destroying an entire town in just a few hours, losing the life of a small boy as his family tried to outrun that fire. I have walked in fields in this state that are experiencing droughts where people don't know if they're going to have the production level, not only to feed their family, but also to feed the state and the country. I have been there responding to floods in Okanagan when the snowpack melted so fast out of Canada that cities just along the river were flooded. I remember the heat dome of 2020, where our state that I grew up, this Northwest, is cold, wet, and rainy. I could never imagine it getting over 70. And we lost 120 people's lives and over 1,000 nationally. And it's only going to get hotter. So we don't have time, actually, to keep standing in our corner, bolstered by a sense of righteousness, calling each other names, unwilling to meet and work with others. Time is of the essence. I truly believe that. We are in a crisis and time isn't on our side, so we've got to be coming together. As I would say, insanity, I wouldn't say this, Einstein said this. It's doing the same thing over and over again, and we keep just hunkering down and fighting harder and stronger and putting up more walls, and it's not working. Second, I truly believe nature is a uniter if we will let it. First, we all depend on nature for our survival. This is the good news. We all need shelter. We all need food. We all need clean air. We all need clean water, which means we all have a sense of dependency on it, and we're all in this together. Second, most of us are actually drawn naturally to the environment. Nature has this awe factor, and if you don't believe me, all you have to do is think about the total eclipse where people all over the world, from every nationality, every political belief, came, and they went in the dark, cold of night and the frozen tundra to the hot deserts to sit in awe of nature. And lastly, I have seen it from people, that people come together in a time of crisis to help their neighbor, whether they're farmers and ranchers, whether they're neighbors picking up the shovels to save a home, whether it's in the urban environment of LA or it's the most rural environment of Wakanda. And I've seen it with firefighters every single day who are responding to these fires, helping complete strangers. And I've also seen it from people all over this country that came to Medical Lake after the Gray Fire in Spokane County just to go through this disaster area of a home to find any sentimental value to be able to provide to that homeowner. That is goodness. And they are Republicans and they are liberals and they come from everywhere. So the question is, how can we change the course we're on? If we are more politically polarized than ever, can we change? Can we depoliticize and depolarize ourselves? Can we devote our skills and our work to working on the problem at hand? Here's how I believe we can come together in big and small ways. And I'm not just preaching this. I'm going to be really frank with you. I've actually practiced it, and I didn't practice it alone. I've witnessed it from others doing the same thing at the local and state level, and it has worked with success. So the first thing is we have got to build trust and relationship. We must become the change that we seek. This requires to break out of our silo, break out of our comfort zone, and build relationships and a sense of community with others that are different from us. I went on a cattle drive. I try to go every year. I'm going to be honest, I don't like a horse. It's not comfortable. I took training just so I didn't embarrass my grandfather who's passed away in front of these ranchers, because they thought I was going to be great on a horse if I have my grandfather as a rancher. And I rode for 12 hours a day on a horse, right? And they do it every single year, multiple times. And I rode side by side with a 4-year-old girl and her 6-year-old brother who did the same 12 hours with me. And I actually started to understand how much they care about the environment and how much they're concerned for the future. Okay, the second part of this is, this shows, I'm trying to show, actually I'm going to go back for a second. I'm going to show Dan that I actually did my homework and studied before. He gave me an assignment to watch other people that spoke before me, and I did my homework. But before I do that, I'm going to say the second thing, which is, you got to be humble. You need to acknowledge our own limitations and dependencies. And so half of the work is actually showing up, but having humility, a desire to understand, to learn, and to listen is key. So I'm going to ask, how many of you have ever planted a wheat seed? Raise your hand. Okay, we got 1, 2, 4. How many of you eat? 5. Okay. How many of you? 6. How many of you eat wheat? Okay, only a few gluten intolerant. Okay. Yeah, okay, so how many of you live in a house made of wood? Okay, wood is good, clearly. Choice of product here. How many of you have planted a tree? I love that, that's great. Okay, how many of you have planted enough trees to build a house? Hey, Eric, I know Eric. You count, Eric, go ahead. Okay, good job, Alden. I know a few of the people here. Okay, how many of you have actually then harvested the wood to build the house? Oh, look at that. Okay, this is pretty good. We got about a 10. We got 10. Okay. All right. How many of you have put out a fire? Kitchen fires count for a moment because I can't raise my hand. Okay. How many put out a wildfire? All right. Good job, Eric. Oh, good. Oh, look. I like that. We got a few here. So how many of you have ridden on a bulldozer on a side of the cliff in the middle of the night trying to build a fuel break? All right, I now know who I need as my neighbors. Okay, we only have a few. For those out there in the Zoom land, we only had a few handfuls. I'm going to tell you, when I asked myself those questions and when I met with people who do it every single day, it makes you humble. It really makes you humble. It made me realize also how dependent I am on others for basic survival. And when it comes to climate change, we are seeing a major disruption in critical resources we depend on, from water and wood and energy and air. And when you look at who the producers are of these resources, it is largely rural. They're throughout our state and country, and largely they become more and more conservative. And at the same time, the consumers of these goods live more in the urban areas, and they tend to be more liberal. And climate change will make these resources in more demand, and the maintenance, care, and survival of these resources will make our rural communities more essential, and the people who are doing that work, and our urban communities more dependent on them. For example, how many of you thought your air quality came from the rural communities until 2018 and 2020, when we had the worst air quality in the world? Our water resources, Seattle's kind of lucky. If you actually look, majority of the state is in drought again for the 4th year, and Seattle is one of the only communities in the entire state that is not experiencing a drought. You know how that feels for a rural community? Pretty hard and pretty bad. So I say that largely, we've got to come to a place where we realize that our survival and our dependency does depend on each other, even if we never see them or talk to them or know them. And so I'm urging people to start to build that sense of community, to go out of their comfort zones, that we have much more in common than we have different. And I urge you to do it in a way where you're starting off not by making a case for your own position, but instead starting off by saying, I have a lot to learn. I don't know what you do. I don't know how you do it. Or saying thank you. Thank you for the work you do. Last point on that is we also need to see how dependent besides we are on the other, that also we own their challenges and they own ours. And that means we need to be part of each other's solution, because in the end, those challenges will be ours in the urban areas, and they will be theirs in the rural areas. And the sooner we start building this, the more resilient we will be to climate change and all the other disruptors that we've seen over the last 2 weeks, if you're watching anything around stocks and tariffs. So lastly, last point on that one is developing solutions and strategies that invoke all those moral principles. This is a key thing, and this is where I did my homework. For those who came last year, you might have seen this image. So remember those 6 moral foundations that Jonathan Haidt's research showed that control our thinking and our believing: care, fairness, loyalty, authority, sanctity, liberty. And his research revealed his argument that we all have them, but liberals have more in the context of care and fairness and loyalty. Or liberty, and that conservatives have more across the board is equal. So I'm going to try a few examples to see how this plays out. So I'm going to start with fairness. It reminds me a lot of the debates between my father and my grandfather when I was a small child. So the Fairness Cheating Foundation, this moral foundation makes us sensitive to whether someone, anybody, how many students here? You guys know about cheating and fairness, right? So it makes us sensitive whether someone or something is being treated fairly, or if something doesn't feel fair. It makes us want to shun the cheaters. So if you're a liberal leaning, you may see things as my father did, which is challenging wealthy and powerful groups as exploiting those at the bottom while not paying their fair share, whether it's taxes or other things. And if you're a conservative leaning, you may see things like my grandfather, that liberals are socialists who take his hard-earned money that he worked his entire life from him, along with his land. And for a long time now, the focus on environmental protection and reducing carbon emissions, to be really frank, has really focused a lot on our rural areas. It has asked them to take the burden from the carbon sequestration to the increased environmental protections on fish and wildlife habitat, on our waters. All you have to do is look at our shorelines in the city to see where are those riparian buffers. And conservatives have felt this sense of unfairness as they work harder and harder and don't make as much money oftentimes as a result of it. So last year's speaker, I found very fascinating, Professor Dr. Lucy, who spoke on the impacts of urbanization and carbon cycling in our ecosystem. And this work is really important, and not only because our urban areas are our greatest carbon emissions, but because heat has become our nation's greatest natural disaster. It is the one that is going to be the most deadliest disaster that we saw it last year in Texas. We saw it throughout the country. We're going to see it again this year. We're going to keep on seeing it. So if you look at this map, it basically is showing you where the hot spots are, where most carbon emissions are, and no surprise, it is in the more dense urban areas, Portland, Seattle, LA, San Francisco, and then over on the east side. And so cities play this disproportionate role in the process of carbon emissions and carbon sequestration, and emissions are happening in particular places. 70% of fossil fuel emissions happen on 3% of our land in our cities. She goes on to actually focus on solutions, and I love this part, solutions. She pointed out that the best solutions, if we wanted to get quick, immediate impact, is to actually plant more trees in the urban area, which will also cool as we see more heat challenges, but also painting your roof white. How many of you live in the city? Majority of you. How many have a white roof? Oh, I like that. I'm going to get mine painted tomorrow. This shocked me because I had no idea. Now, I'm going to tell you that I have been in Olympia for 8 years. We finally put money to urban forestry. It was $500,000 a year for the entire state, which I oversee urban forestry. We finally got it to $5 million, which is still just a drop in the bucket, right? And when I look at local governments, cities, and some of the more densely areas of our state who have this heat crisis, I also see that their capital budgets are not spending on forestry. I also know, pretty certain, I shouldn't say I know, that there is no budget for white paint. But at least the legislature doesn't have a budget for white paint. I don't believe the city of Seattle does, but it would go a long way. If they either are not paying for it, they could be incentivizing homeowners, or they could put it in the development regulations, which is what Dr. Lucy was arguing for, because she saw a dramatic reduction in it. Now, my point of this example is largely that rural areas say, that feels unfair. Conservative communities say, that feels unfair. Why aren't actions being taken in your own backyard, in your own community, that's going to reduce those carbon emissions, right? When we're being asked to do more on our side. Now, whether you agree or disagree, that is their perspective. That is what they see. And they can say it along the areas of fish and wildlife habitat. They can say it along where does the waste of Seattle and many of King County go? It goes into the Puget Sound, which is making it very polluted. And where is the movement to actually remove that waste, right? Second example, which hits very much at home, is, I'm going to point, sorry, that was, I'm going to point this out, because this is just a great, I used to share this with my kids all the time. I used to share it all the time with my kids when they were saying, it's his fault, it's not my fault, it's his fault. And I think we do this all the time. And we certainly do it in politics. And maybe not you, but I see it in the halls of politics all the time. It's not my people, it's your people that are the problem. So the second example is our forests. Everybody who's heard me talk, I talk ad nauseum about this, but we in Washington State have a forest health crisis. In central and eastern Washington alone, we have 3 million acres of forest that were dead and dying, creating catastrophic fires. The fact is we have too many trees in a very small amount of area. They're competing for limited soil, nutrients, water, sunlight, and as a result, catastrophic fires coming in just like it would in your fireplace, because it's literally kindling on the landscape. And this is a phenomenal example, really, where you can look at our rural communities and they see this and they say, conservative rural communities have been raising the flag for decades, saying action, action, action. Our forests are becoming degraded, dying, they're burning. And they've asked for steps up. And their position has been, look, this is the degradation of the environment. Why are you allowing the degradation? It's the sanctity of nature. And they didn't understand why people were not stepping up. And to be frank, our state didn't step up until the smoke-filled skies hit Seattle and the west side of the state. And all of a sudden, legislators on the west side said, Hilary, oh my gosh, what are we going to do about this wildfire crisis? At this point, over 6 to 8 years had already allowed burning huge catastrophic fires that had threatened homes and communities. We'd already lost over 4 million acres of forest. And conservatives say, what about the sanctity of nature? Why are we not taking care of it? Now, the good news, and this is just some examples of what the evergreen forest has started to look like. The great news is we made progress, like I said in my intro. Here's another example, and this plays out Oregon and Washington. Oregon just had almost 2 million acres burned this last year. This is in Canada. We all remember the BC fires. I mean, you can't go anywhere without seeing now, if you have my lens, dead, dying forest. Now, the great thing is we know what to do, like I said, that will stop these catastrophic fires. We know how to heal nature, and conservative rural communities have been asking and calling for it forever. The great thing is when we meet that moral foundation of sanctity and caring for nature and investing in it, we also have the opportunity to increase not just the environmental benefits, but also outcomes for these rural communities, the communities where environmental regulations have gutted economically and socially these communities. They can now get back into the woods. They can restore the forest. They can reforest the forest. They can create sustainable local wood products like you see in the mills, where these are smaller diameter, and Vaughan Timbers Brothers, which is up in Colville, the last remaining Eastern Washington mill, is the one solution we have right now to take those smaller diameter and the waste. And we now see buildings that are being built that are far more sustainable than we've ever built. This is the most sustainable industrial building that we have in Washington State, and maybe the first one in Western United States and North America, but it's all made out of dead, dying, diseased trees, smaller diameter to heal the forest. You have University of British Columbia's residential hall became the first tallest 18-story building, so it's using less concrete, less steel, and wood right there from their local backyard that's restoring the health of the forest with that. University of Washington, congratulations, is also leading in this area with cross-laminated timber, with the Health Sciences and Education building. And you also have the first CLT housing units to go into Seattle, which is Heartwood, which is an affordable housing project, which is just a model. And the other great thing is biochar, because I can't do a lecture without biochar. We have all these slash piles that come. It's the waste material that you can't send to the mills. What we did before is we burned it in the atmosphere, creating carbon emissions, because we had to beat nature to it. If we didn't beat nature to it, we now had a catastrophic wildfire. Great thing is when you go and send it actually to a production facility in a hot kiln, they can take the gas, power 13,500 homes in the facility that's opening up in Port Angeles, which is one of those communities that was wrecked by a lot of the environmental regulations. And then it goes on to reduce stormwater and the contaminants coming off our roads as well as in our agriculture fields. Believe it or not, when cows eat it, it reduces methane, which is another plus. So the solution, this solution also supports liberty, right? People wanted freedom to be resilient, to do their work, to be able to care for nature. So if you look at the four moral foundations, loyalty, authority, sanctity, and liberty, that conservatives value equally along with care and fairness that liberals value as even more, these are the biggest and the most consistent partisan differences and what we are most divided on. And so my hypotheses and what I've actually tested is that when we can apply those to everyday issues that we might have been intractable or not working, especially in environmental issues, if we can walk in that other person's shoes on those foundation levels, right, we can look through their lens and we can solve the problem together. And I want to, how am I doing on time? Pretty good? I want to play this if I can. My last example is a carbon bill. And this carbon bill, I made a philosophy that every bill I move forward through the legislature had to have a Republican and a Democrat in the House and in the Senate on it, because I got better legislation. I also got better results, and I also helped them learn how to work together, which is what we need more of. And I decided as one of my last kind of piece of legislation, I was going to move a carbon bill that would allow the state to be able to sell carbon for reforestation, afforestation, urban forestry, for kelp and eelgrass, because we've lost 60% of our kelp and submerged forests in the Puget Sound, 90% in our South Sound. And this is Joel Kretz, is going to testimony, who I met, who said he was going to kill me, if you remember. And he was lead on this bill, a carbon bill. Rural, Republican, conservative out of Okanagan County. And his words, I don't know, I should have asked how to play this first. How do I play it? Oh.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I entered this process with a little bit of skepticism. I can't say I'm an expert on carbon or carbon markets. I'm not going to cash in my Bitcoins for carbon credits, probably. But I do see a new market that's emerging, and I think we've got an opportunity for the Department of Natural Resources and the beneficiaries of the trust to make some extra money on the carbon credit angle. That said, it was still a bit of a leap for me to get involved in this because I think many of us represent rural communities where the forest has been the lifeblood in many, many ways to our communities, you know, both in timber harvest, but also the other values that we get from the land that have sustained many of us for generations. My family's been working in the woods for 3 generations. My dad was there his whole life. My grandpa died there. We've got some blood, sweat, and tears in it, and it's pretty dear to the hearts of many of us here, in particularly the rural areas. But it's been a pleasure to work with people with different backgrounds on this one, and I really can't say how much I appreciate some of the folks from the rural areas understanding just the power that we see in the forest, whether it holds over us, that our whole lifetimes have been spent there in many cases. And the dance on this has been, how do we enter a new market that has possibilities for benefiting the trust without hurting the economies in the rural areas? And I think we're there on this. I've got to give a lot of credit to the folks that I work with on this. There's a lot of trust. I think we're doing some things that we seldom do around here, and it's been really encouraging to me. And I would say this is built more on trust and relationships than probably any bill I've worked on over here. And I'm going to vote yes, and there may be some tweaks in the Senate, but I think we're really close to a good process. And I just want to thank the people that really put a lot of work and trust into this.
Thank you.
I'm going to tell you, 8 years ago when I met him, and he almost killed me, I guess, and even the years that followed, I don't think I would have ever thought that I would have had a bipartisan bill to sell carbon on ecosystem services pass out of the House 84 to 13. 84 to 13, meaning a majority of the Republicans supported it. So I'm going to cut really, oops, nope, there we go. John Mills, I think, said it really best, and really what I think we need to be moving to, that liberals and conservatives are both critical. They both have something to contribute, that they form a balance, a yin and yang, and that both are actually necessary, like light and night and day, and rural producers and urban consumers. And if we can start to step outside of a moral high ground and listen, learn, and build that trust and relationship. You heard him say it, trust and relationship, trust and relationship. I think we can lead together. We can actually go farther, faster, and for a longer time. These are the 5 pieces. Dalai Lama said, lead with compassion, lead with affection, lead with love, don't lead with anger. Every single day, I had the greatest honor to lead with firefighters, thousands of them all over this world that came to fight here in Washington State. And they are honestly the semblance of us. They are rural, they are urban, they are Republican, they are Democrat. Every time people are running away from a fire, they're running into it. And they never ask if you are Republican or Democrat. They never ask if you're rich or poor. They never ask if you're black or white. They put their lives on the line, and if every single one of us here in this room and outside can start to live with that same kind of love and compassion for others and a sense of trust that they have for their own colleagues, we can make a difference. We don't have a choice. We have to. We are in this place right now with climate that it's only going to get worse unless we come together. My last piece is, a message that's held true for me for 8 years, that, honestly, we're all caught in this inescapable network of mutuality tied in a garment of inescapable destiny. One act of kindness reverberates through that garment. One day of leaning in, showing love, showing compassion, finding common ground changes the outcomes of those not yet born. And when you think of climate change and you think of the state we are in right now, not just politically but environmentally, this is the only option we have to actually change the course we're on. So thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to working with you all.
Thank you so much. That energy and optimism that I talked about shone right through in your talk, and I really want to thank you.
We need it right now. Woo.
Yes. We have a microphone over here for questions if you want to come this way. No. Sorry, we only have one. Yeah, I can do that.
Okay. You're going to get your steps in. You got your Fitbit?
Yeah, it's on my phone.
Okay, good.
Thank you. Great talk.
Oh, good.
Full of inspiration, full of great principles. But one thing is missing, the path forward. So if you could fill this room with representative people from every part of the state, each of which who really cares about the future, tell me what your agenda would be.
So my hope was, this is actually what I believe is the path forward. I'm sorry, can you hear me? I believe this is the path forward. And that was for us. And you could do it on any issue. I will be frank with you. I think you got to start on small issues first, that right, where you're building the trust and relationship. You are going out into the communities where people do not think like you, vote like you, right? And you're listening and you're learning. As I have a motto, it says you listen and then you learn and then you can lead. And it's in doing these steps right here that I believe we can start to change the course. It doesn't mean, Joel Kretz and I do not agree on everything. Trust me, there are some things we would have a drop, but there are things we could. And I truly believe my focus here is in the environment. There is a lot that we could actually be getting accomplished if we're working together to do it. And these would be the 5 principles that I'd say you start with.
Working together requires a first step. What would that step be?
Want to join me on a cattle drive? I'm joking. So my first step, like I said, I didn't have to be elected to go into the rural community, right? I didn't have to be. I did. I was elected when I finally did, but I went in and I basically walked the community. I went and met and talked with people at the coffee house. I went and talked to people at the bar. I learned pool pretty good. I'm still not as good as my kids, but I just met people where they are, and I listened. I didn't bring my own like hubris and my own, law degrees and all my experience. I just listened. And in listening, I got to actually learn about what their biggest fears are, what their biggest challenges are, how they really see problems, and how we can work together on solutions. My grandfather had this great piece of advice, which I've never been able to learn, which is, Hilary, you learn more if you listen more. And I'm still not great at it. But that actually is what worked. I walked those woods. I knew nothing about wildfire. I then moved on to conversations with fire chiefs. I moved on to conversations with firefighters. I moved on to farmers and foresters. And I just learned. I became a student of the land, right? Getting out of my books or getting out of my ivory towers or my, Olympia halls, right?
We have another question up here.
Did that answer your question? I hope so.
So a comment from elders at the Yakama Nation, I think would stand to the first step to take, and that is you're given by God or some spiritual being, depending upon your belief, you're given 7 organs to sample, or 7 parts of the organs to sample the environment. Use them proportionately. Your mouth is one of the 7.
Oh my God, I love that. Thank you.
That was more of a comment, by the way.
That's okay. I'll take it. I always say I take questions, comments, and criticisms. You know, yeah. Yes, sir.
So you talked about political parties, communities. What about working with the private sector, you know, particularly with startups, you know, working in this space, especially at your time as commissioner?
Yeah, so it's great. And so first of all, I'm a big believer, bring everybody into the room to be able to help solve. Don't let them take over the room. Make sure. And so I believe we need companies. The biochar facility is an example of that. The mills are an example. All of those, the architects, the engineers, those are all companies that are using those products to build. When it comes to wildfire, we are already using new technologies. It's been critical. We need to rapidly scale those up. So if you were going specifically to wildfire, we're using, is that where you were going with that question? Yeah, so we already put about 30 cameras out. We need far more that are able to identify longitude and latitude of our wildfires. So the reality is, it used to be you just looked at for smoke in the air, or somebody called it in on Facebook or on the phone. The more cameras we put up, the more we're able to identify those fires quicker, and then we can get on them quicker. But there's a number of other technologies. But companies are key. I'm going to tell you, we're going to need all the solutions when it comes to climate change. Yeah.
Thank you for coming and giving this talk. It's great. I think many of us would agree that the climate polycrisis is a human construct, and that policy tends to favor human solutions to that. I'm curious, a personal question about the interaction you had with the guy in Port Angeles, and if that affected your understanding of the legitimacy of spotted owls as users of the landscape as well.
Yeah, I mean, here's what my take on, I'm not here to make a position on whether I thought wasn't part of the spotted owl decision itself, but in fact, Dr. Brown and I worked on the Marble Murrelet decision, which took about another 35,000 acres off for survival of those. And I truly believe that we need to be doing our part to truly save endangered species, especially our key indicator species. I spent a lot of work in salmon survival, right? They are not only our culture, but they are also part of our survival piece. What I think was broken when that decision came out is there wasn't an inclusion of the people who were going to be most impacted. So it was a decision that happened, and it came down, and then the people who made the decision and the policy walked away. And they completely walked away from those communities. You might have heard the term just transition. For example, as we're moving off coal because of its impact on climate, there has been this just transition of those people who were working in those coal facilities to get trained in other types of jobs and economic opportunities. That is the place we need to be as transitions are happening because of climate change. It did not happen in the 90s, and we are now paying the consequences, and I mean the global we, everything from homelessness to addiction to unemployment, 7 to 12%. And that communities up and down the coast. And frankly, we're paying, if you're liberal, you're paying for it politically. It has changed the politics of the coast. And I believe we still have a responsibility. It didn't go away just because we failed at the time. We need to be going back and saying, we got it wrong. We failed you. And we understand it's hurt your families, it's hurt your communities, it's hurt your schools, it's hurt your health facilities, and it's hurt your economy. And we want to now do right by it. And we don't have the answers, but we're here to help. And we're not going to go away until we help fix it. And that's what needs to happen. The biochar is an example of that, but again, that's just one tiny example. But that's what needs to happen to heal those communities. And it ripples out in other areas besides spotted owl.
We had a question online
Okay.
that said something like, tell us more about biochar. You referenced it a couple of times in your answers here.
I love
Can you
biochar.
just describe that,
Yeah.
why it's helping rural communities, how it, as a
Yeah.
product, is an important
There it is.
innovation?
Okay. Yeah, so actually I came around to biochar in a very odd way. We did that 20-year forest health plan, right? where we're going to actually restore 1.25 million acres of forest in central and eastern Washington on federal, state, tribal, and private lands. We're going to be agnostic to property lines because fire and disease does not follow property lines. And we were going, and as you said, I work fast. I sort of get impatient, especially when we have so much work to get done. And the 2020 Labor Day firestorm hit where 600,000 acres burned in 72 hours. And I looked at my team and I said, we got to go faster. We got to do this in 10 years. We got to double down. And they're like, Hilary, you're going to burn the state down. And I go, what do you mean? Well, there's these slash piles, and some of these slash piles are as large as this room, right, Eric? They are as large as this room, okay? Multiple of these on a landscape where you're taking that woody debris that is not able to go to a mill and become either cross-laminate timber or 2x4s, right? And I said, well, what do we do with that waste? Well, we burn it, and we don't have enough time or resources to burn it before nature gets to it. Fortunately, I did not invent biochar, somebody else had done, but actually it goes back, centuries, right? But all of a sudden, it's becoming a new industry because they're seeing the ability to get funding through the energy credit component because they're able to reduce the carbon emissions, so they get credit from that. Then they get credit for clean, renewable energy and putting it back on the grid. And then they're left with this product. And the great thing about this product, like I said, is one, it locks in that carbon for 100 years plus into this biochar, which you can see partly in this picture. You put it out on the soils for forest that makes it healthier. You put it on agriculture for better yield with less pesticides, less ability to reduce water, but also capture and hold water. You put it in stormwater, green infrastructure in our cities, and little did I know, you feed it to the cattle and it'll reduce the methane. I call it black gold. It is amazing. Okay, now a facility is opening up in Port Angeles. It's like anything when it's brand new, it's getting hard, right? Where's your buyers? Who's going to buy the product? Do we have enough buyers? Because it is brand new and novel. There is also a company out of Wazoo that is actually doing in container shipments, so you can actually move them into the woods, because one of the biggest challenges is getting that waste out of the woods. It is not that easy. And I think my point there is I've heard it so many times, we're like, I have an idea and it's going to be easy. There is nothing easy about any of this. It is not easy to restore the health of the forest when there's not a mill for 6 hours, right? And you've got to get it over the mountains in the winter. It is not easy to get the waste material out, right? But new technologies, and the great thing is we sent a signal with the Forest Health Plan that 2 of the largest manufacturing facilities for cross-laminate timber are now in Washington State, that are creating real rural jobs and really important ones.
Thank you so much. I want to thank you again for a wonderful talk and appreciate your coming back to visit
guys.
us. Please come back again. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you guys. Thanks for coming. Thanks for your questions.
That's great.
Good.